Welcome to the third episode of Football Transfer Markets. Today we are going to cover the Croatian jurisdiction, and our guest is Hrvoje Čabraja, the head of the legal department at FC Lokomotiva Zagreb, which competes in the top-tier Croatian professional football league. He's also a member of the appeal committee of the Zagreb Football Association, academic director of agents course organized by Aspira College, and sports legal counsel of Union of European Clubs. Today he will enlighten us about the domestic football regulations governing Croatian football. So let's begin. Hrvoje, nice to meet you today. Before we start, I want to make a small disclaimer because Mr. Hrvoje Čabraja is the head of legal of FC Lokomotiva Zagreb from Croatia, which for some extent makes him a club official. So for this sense, I would like to emphasize that what is said, what is told, what is informed during this episode cannot by any means constitute any kind of position or any kind of legal interpretation from the club's perspective, and the information contained herein cannot be used as a ground to instigate disciplinary proceedings, cannot be used evidence in any kind of proceedings. So what is going to be told here is exclusively for educational purposes and cannot be by any means interpreted as a club's position in no way. So now I suppose we can start. Hrvoje, we usually discuss three topics during this podcast, and the fourth one is up to the guest. So the first three topics are related to the following questions: domestic training compensation system. Second one is common types of transfer fees used during the domestic transfers if they are made against the compensation. Third one is the standard contract form usually recommended or from time to time enforced by the league or federations, and how the clubs domestically deal with that, because we know that, let's say, despite even if it's enforced, clubs and players agree for other conditions, and in any case, I suppose there will be any workaround. And the fourth question is up to you. Whatever you would like to discuss about domestic market from Croatia, absolutely up to you, and I will catch you up without any problems. So we'll make some comparisons, etc. So let's start. Domestic training compensation system. What you will tell about?
Okay. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. First of all, the training compensation in Croatia, the system is fairly similar to FIFA's provisions. So it's basically a carbon copy of what's going on at the international level. So as you well know, training compensation is payable until the end of the calendar year of the player's 23rd birthday for the training incurred in the period from his 12th until the 21st birthday. And this is something that works in Croatia as well. Training compensation is due when the player is registered for the first time as a professional, and each time this professional is transferred between two clubs until the end of the calendar year of his 23rd birthday. What's interesting in Croatia's system is the amounts paid for the training compensation. So the difference between the FIFA's and the Croatian system is in the amounts, actually. Category 1 in Croatia, these are the top tier clubs in Croatia. They pay 5,000 euros per year, whereas second category clubs are second tier clubs in Croatia, which pay 2,000 euros per year for training compensation. And then the rest of the clubs in Croatia pay 1,000 euros per year for the training compensation. This third category is also used for the training incurred for the period of 12th until 15th birthday. So similar to what FIFA has with the fourth category at the international level. Additional interesting thing in Croatia is the percentage of the amounts previously stipulated, which are paid depending on the type of the contract concluded with the player. So, for example, if a club concludes a professional or an employment contract with the player, 100% of the amount is paid to the training clubs, meaning 5K per year for a top tier club. However, if a club concludes a scholarship agreement with this same player, in that case, only 25% of that amount is paid per year.
So the first question that immediately comes out of my mind when you just told about the scholarship contract.
Okay.
Are we speaking about the contracts which do not grant the player the professional status within the meaning of Article 2 of RSTP?
And this would actually be the next thing that I was planning to talk about. So what's also interesting in Croatia is that this player status change from amateur to professional um, is done in case a contract is concluded, pursuant to which the player is entitled to a monthly remuneration of 250 euros or more on a monthly basis. So yearly 3,000 euros. This
But
is the actual change. No, it doesn't matter if the contract is a scholarship agreement or a professional or an employment contract. If a player earns more than 250 per month, this makes him a professional. If it's
is
less, he's an
is
amateur.
this is this 250 which you just described is somehow related to minimum wage established in the country, or is just
It's
something
not.
that
It's an amount established by the Croatian Football Federation, and this is interesting because the Croatian Sports Act, national law on sports, actually establishes the amount of 10,000 euros per year, being a threshold between the amateur and the professional sports people.
in other words, the amount that is required for one to exercise sporting activity as a bare minimum, something like this.
Exactly. This is 10,000 per year pursuant to the Sports Act, whereas pursuant to the Croatian, let's call it RSTP, it's
Mhm.
250 per month, 3,000 per year.
Yes, quite interesting. And I have another question related to
Mhm.
this topic. So probably you have an NDRC, I suppose.
Yeah,
Okay. So we know, right, that according to the same FIFA circulars and existing CAS jurisprudence, um, if you are able to prove that the training costs were higher or lower, you can, let's say, fight for somewhat of an amendment for the compensation amount. Well, which we see from time to time, we see being done at FIFA level or CAS level. But what's interesting for me, have you ever encountered this kind of dispute at the NDRC level?
no, no, to be honest, not because the training compensation disputes are not that present in at the domestic level in Croatia. So
So it, it's somewhat of an automatic process that one pays the other and they just proceed and that's it.
yeah, it's rarely a case before an NDRC. So it's either a training club doesn't even know that it's entitled to a training compensation, and then just the new club just doesn't pay any compensation, or a training club comes up asking for the money, and they get it. The training compensation is paid for.
So there is no any threshold of there is no any kind of a tool or level of supervising this process by
No,
football federation or
no,
whatever.
not at all.
You know, I'm asking because for comparison, in Armenia, uh, this player registration processing is being done. I mean, not only in Armenia. From 2019, FIFA issued a circular that is going to be mandatory everywhere. I'm speaking about the electronic registration
Of
system.
course, there is
Yeah,
one in Croatia. Yeah.
yeah. So in our registration system, the calculation is being done automatically, well, let's say more or less, because there are some reservations on this. But in any case, like the job is done, the system calculates automatically, and in order to register the player, you must provide the proof of payment.
Oh,
So this kind of let's call it like this. This is a kind of a filter which actually makes the clubs which are not aware that they are entitled to training
it's very good.
compensation to receive this compensation. So yeah,
So
I
it's
also
kind of a
yeah,
clearinghouse at a national level, right?
yeah, absolutely, exactly. And from the regulatory perspective, if the clubs have dispute about the amount or whatever, they are entitled to instigate proceedings in front of NDRC. but I'm also not aware if something like this happened or not. But in any case, the one which you said, the system that is copied from, let's say not copied, but is similar to FIFA's one, is quite good because it lets people to have some kind of a certainty when they represent a player in the domestic market, because
That's true.
in
Yeah.
many countries domestic training compensation differs. For example, we have two thresholds, like the clubs can agree for a lower threshold, and it is being constructed upon a way that is being done within European Union. You know what I mean? If the club says I'm not interested in this in the services of the
Okay.
player, I just request the lower threshold, which is much cheaper. So this is done in order not to prevent the player's development, also fall into the supervision tools for the FA to have the ability to supervise the processing.
It's very good.
And yeah, so this was done previously. Okay, so what else about training compensation?
Sure. What has been just recently introduced is this threshold that we just talked about, the amount pursuant to which a player's status changed from an amateur to the professional. Up until the last year, every single player that concluded a contract was registered with the status of a professional. So no matter the amount of that contract. So this is something that has been changed recently in Croatia, and in my opinion is a good thing, because young 12, 13-year-olds with 100 or 50 euros per month, not changing their status to professional, it is a good thing, if you ask me. Additional thing that is present in Croatia, and for me this one is quite interesting, is not related to the training compensation, but to another mechanism within the training reward system, and that's the solidarity mechanism. Of course, you know about that one as well, surely. What's peculiar about Croatian system is that there's an additional 1% of solidarity. So you normally deduct the 5% when the transfer is done, and then there's an additional 1% which is paid by the player's former club, so not the new club but the former club, to the player's training club's local associations, using the same mechanism as with the regular solidarity, regardless of whether a transfer is domestic or international.
So
So yeah,
it's
yeah,
it remind me about the movie called Inception. Probably you know about it. Like
yeah, I don't know.
yeah, like dream within a dream. Why I say like this? Because if the new club pays the former club the 5%, so the former club also contributes to the local association.
Yeah,
So it's like solidarity contribution within the
the
solidarity
solidarity
contribution.
contribution,
Yep,
exactly.
actually,
No, but
actually,
this 1% is not taken from the 5%, but from the amount that the former club actually receives from the new club. So
yeah.
from this
So it's
95%. Yeah,
let's say from the net, from the wording of net amount,
yeah.
the former club receives 4% net, because the one is going to be directed to the local
No, no,
associations,
no.
correct or not?
The former club does not receive it. It's not from the solidarity amount that this 1% is deducted. It's from the transfer fee. So
Yeah,
yeah,
so that's what I'm saying. The new club must pay 5%, correct?
no, the new club pays 95% of the transfer fee to the former club, and out of this 95,
Oh,
former club takes away
yeah,
1% and gives
yeah,
it to the local federation. Yeah,
yeah, so by default it's not included in the amount.
no,
I understood. I
yeah,
understood. Okay. And is it possible to regulate it by transfer agreement? For instance, I'm talking about 100% plus 5 model. You know, right? There is
yeah,
95
yeah.
plus 5 and 100 plus 5.
No,
So
the
can you?
local associations will only ask for 1% of what the former club actually receives, and that's it. So
Yeah,
the
but
amount that comes to the bank account of the former club, give us 1%. And this has only been recently introduced to the Croatian RSTP as well, and I'm expecting some cases before the NDRC because of this additional solidarity. To be honest,
Yes, but to be fair, from the regulatory perspective, I think it's good thing because with this mechanism, you also encourage the local association to somehow, let's say, help the local clubs to continue the players' development. So it's not a bad thing from this perspective.
sure, yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
obviously, it's going to impact on the amounts of the transfer fees. Obviously, when
yeah, yeah,
negotiating.
yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so quite interesting. Uh, that's the meaning of this podcast. You see, every jurisdiction is different, so quite interesting from the research perspective or whatever. The last question I would like to discuss with you about this domestic training compensation system is whether or not at local NDRC level you had a case where the dispute at stake was finding the player's development being ended and the player trained before 21.
No, I've never heard of this. Never ever. And especially from the perspective of Croatian clubs who are usually promoting youngsters at a very early at a very early stage in their career. So you'll find 17, 16 year olds even playing regularly for Croatian top tier clubs, which could clearly be understood as the training period being done. But I've never heard of a case in which a club actually disputed this. So, not to my knowledge, no.
Well, well, to be honest, by per se, even at FIFA level, this is not a popular thing. So I don't think that it's common even at FIFA level to happen.
I
So
agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I suppose we covered the training compensation entirely. So let's jump to the second question, which is common transfer fee types used during domestic transfers if they are being done against fee
Okay.
or including sell-on fee. Why not?
Sure. And this we can just discuss this as a continuation of our previous topic, especially from the solidarity point of view, where you can see that actually the local associations and the national federation actually understood that the biggest amounts of money coming to Croatia are the ones coming from the transfer fees. So basically, most of the transfer money, as I've said, coming to Croatia is from abroad. Croatia is basically a selling country. As I've said, most clubs promote youngsters from their academies and look to sell them abroad as soon as possible, because the transfer money is basically if not only then one of the top parts of their yearly budgets. So what Croatian clubs look to do is to sell their players abroad as soon as possible. Because within Croatia, transfer compensation is not that common, and especially not huge amounts of compensation. So, for example, one of our recent transfers that Lokomotiva was included in, one of our recent players that we sold, was Roko Šimić, who moved from Lokomotiva at the age of 17 to Red Bull Salzburg, and this is not even close to what we could get in from another Croatian club. That's fairly the only transfer money that is happening in Croatia. So money coming from abroad. Clubs are looking to export their players to clubs from usually from Western European countries or to Western European countries. And very usually the concept is selling young players, so 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds,
But
and so
even
on.
within the clubs, if they transfer the players domestically, is the sell-on fee clause popular
Yeah,
to
yeah,
to
very popular.
safeguard? Yeah, and I would like to know in your jurisdiction, is it popular to waive the training compensation in exchange of sell-on fee?
Again, very popular. So I think that what's going on with the training compensation, but this is my opinion on the global level, is that training compensation is rarely paid. It's usually waivers or agreements, including sell-on fees or some conditional payments, and so on. So this is exactly what is happening in Croatia as well. Most of the players leaving from clubs, from lower tier clubs to higher tier clubs, or vice versa, are carrying a waiver with them to be able to get registered with a different club. So yeah, the answer is yes.
Because I think that the problem with the international training compensation system, or which causes the scenario which we were talking about, is mainly related to the high level of costs. Because to be honest, the system that we have now, uh, many clubs are under UEFA's confederation's jurisdiction, but even even at this level, even being assigned as category 3, like 30K for 1 year registration is a little bit high, because if you are going to take the player in practice, okay, in practice, mostly you are bringing the player who is at least like 2 3 years registered at his former club. So the amount is more or less dancing around 100K.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's a little bit high. And but by the way, for just for the sake of interest, we had a very interesting transfer with Israel, one of my clubs, which agreed, uh, like the Israel club approached to us and provided a perfect calculation of training compensation, like even by euro cents, like this kind of calculation, and said, guys, we are interested in the services of the player, but we are not able to pay the full amount. But let's come to a conclusion that you waive the 50% of the waiver agreement, the
The
training
training compensation.
compensation by waiver agreement. So the club agreed because they were not interested in the services of the player. So what I try to say, like, even at this case, it is evident, that you see that international club with category 3 comes and says, guys, I want him, but it's too much, like, let's reduce, and we also agreed. So I suppose we are not the only one in the market doing so, So I
Exactly.
think that sooner or later, even after this clearinghouse operating, with all the problems we have at the moment, but I think that sooner or later these problems will be solved. I think the time will come when these amounts will be revised, actually.
Yeah. And in my opinion, I agree with you completely. And again, in my opinion, I think that these amounts are a bit high, and that's because you're bringing in a young player for which you're not sure if he will be a first team player, or after a couple of months you realize that he's not good enough for your team, and then you'll try to bring him back to his former club, or sell him further on. So in my opinion, it would be interesting to connect this training compensation amounts to some conditions. For example, appearing in a first team match, or appearing in five first team matches, or something like that. Some
I must
what
double
would you say?
check. I must double check, but if I'm not mistaken, I must double check. But if I'm not mistaken, in England, the domestic training compensation also takes into account the minutes played effectively on the pitch. I must recheck it. I know,
I
don't
know
remember it by heart. It was years ago, but in any way.
I know that a similar system is in place in Germany, but just for a domestic jurisdiction. Whereas a player that signs an agreement with the Bundesliga or Bundesliga 2 club, and then gets fielded, this club is obligated to pay the training compensation, or there's a solidarity fund out of which compensation is paid to the training clubs, but nothing is paid before the player actually competes on a top level. So in
Yeah.
my opinion, that's a good thing, and from that perspective, you could say that the amounts are not that high, because if you're bringing in a player that will actually play for your first team, it means that the amounts are actually well earned.
And about conditional fees, are they popular within the country or?
Yeah, that there are conditional payments in relation to there are different bonuses to the appearance of the player, to goals and assist bonuses are present. Then some team success is also something that creates a bonus for the player's former club and so on.
And
Conditional payments. Yeah.
I would like to know your opinion on one thing which I was thinking about recently. So basically, speaking in sports language, it's very easy to establish, statistically speaking, such conditional payments for the performance of the striker, right? So
Yeah,
because yeah, it's either goal or goal
yeah,
assist or earning penalty or
yeah.
for for the goalkeeper,
Clean sheet.
yes, clean sheet. So, but we have many other positions on the pitch. So I was thinking about, and I don't see this kind of clauses quite often yet, but I suppose we will see it soon. Uh, my upon my experience, the defenders or midfielders or wingers or these positions upon conditional payments are connected with their appearances, as you said, like how many games they appear on the pitch,
Yeah,
etc.
payments.
But I think as Scout, Instat, and many other services are getting more and more popular in the industry, and we also have many of data scientists entering in the football industry. I suppose sooner or later we will see also conditions upon clean passes or clean tackles, something like this. What do you think about it?
I agree with you 100%. I think that this is something that is already present in the American market, in the NBA and then other leagues in the United States, because the statistics are crazy, and the amount of data that is present in that field is huge. So I think that they already started with something like this, and it's just a matter of moment when it will come to football as well, and in European market.
Yeah, I also foresee this because, to be honest, when you look, for example, the position central defending midfielder, which is one of the hardest positions, like he does many different, let's say, tasks on the pitch, and which is not visible at the
Yeah,
first glance
exactly. Exactly.
let's say for fans or for public audience. But statistically speaking, this position contributes also in the performance of the main team. So there is a possibility to stick around with some kind of statistically speaking conditions and connect them with the transfer or whatever. So I think we also covered the second question, domestically
Agree.
speaking. And the third one, which is purely legal, and I would like you to open this question as much as you can,
Okay.
is so-called standard contract form. Does the FA or the league enforce this contract on the club? If it's being enforced, uh, do the Croatian clubs and the players sign another agreement just for the sake of the regulations of their own employment conditions between them? Or is this standard form being recommended? How it's being done in Croatia?
Okay. Okay. Thanks for your question. So yeah, that there are standard agreements in Croatia, which are minimum, like minimum standards that the clubs are obliged to include in the agreements that are actually given from the Croatian Federation to the clubs in a form, in a pattern. And these contracts can be amended. Yeah, some stuff can be added to those contracts, However, minimum standards do have to be kept.
And
What
these minimum standards derive from local RSTP, or
local
how it's being
RSTP, and then the agreement between UEFA, FIFA, and the FIFPro, and then the local FIFPro association. So it's basically in line with both the RSTP, FIFA's RSTP, then national RSTP, and some national laws as well. For example, Sports Act and labor law.
You know why I'm asking this question? Because at first glance, maybe it's not visible, but this particular question is the cross, actually, where domestic regulations, international regulations, Swiss law, and local law of Croatia meet.
Yeah,
And
yeah, that's it.
this is the most, let's say, not, I don't want to say dangerous, but the most complex matter to regulate for the lawyers, because if you have conflict of laws, basically it depends from the type of dispute and the outcome which the club or the player foresee, right? So for example, that you have the collision of laws. I don't think that there we can find any jurisdiction where all these regulations meet perfectly, except maybe from Switzerland, but it's another story. So uh, it depends from, let's say, you see that Croatian law uh, contradicts to FIFA regulations, not strictly, but there are some rooms which leave you as a lawyer to have internal doubts, okay, what will happen in terms of interpretation.
Right,
So basically you must sit and calculate what kind of dispute may arise and what kind of outcome there might be, and finally whether or not you must choose this law to be applicable or that. So I would like to know how, uh, to what extent this deviation we have between the Croatian law, FIFA's regulations, domestic regulations, and Swiss law, and how is being regulated around by the employment contract. Like,
right,
uh, my
right, right.
question maybe is a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
bit
I
complex, but
I got it completely. But first of all, I just have to say that there aren't that many conflicts in Croatia because Croatia is European Union country. Our laws had to be in line with the European Union laws, similar to FIFA. They regularly introduce their regulations that are actually in line with the European Union agreements, so that there aren't that many conflicts with regards to the Croatian law and FIFA RSTP and Swiss law. What is interesting about Croatia, though, is that there are different types of agreements that clubs can conclude with their players. So clubs have the option of concluding an employment agreement, which is just a regular employment agreement in line with the Croatian labor law and the Sports Act, of course. Then there's a professional contract. This one is kind of self-employment, meaning that the player has to set up his own company, and on a monthly basis, he issues an invoice to the club. This type of well, let's call it a structure is fairly present in the Central European market. So, kind of self-employment, but also employment relationship between a player and the club. And this has been approved in a recent CAS case as well. Um, the panel said that these types of contracts comply with the main characteristics of an employment relationship, which are the personal performance of the player, the time frame within which this services will be given, the financial compensation, and the subordination of the employee to the employer. So this is a second type of contract that the club in Croatia can conclude with its players. Then we also have a professional scholarship contract. Interesting, right? Professional scholarship contract and the scholarship contract.
okay, so I have three questions.
I'm listening.
My instincts say to me immediately that this let's say, company independent contractor regulations, which you just described, is purely done for the sake of maintaining contractual stability, and the other regulations deriving from contractual stability. Am I right or not?
Which one? The professional contract, the self-employed that I
No,
mentioned?
self-employment contract, yes, because I highly doubt that the local employment law will let
Yeah,
the
yeah,
contractual
you're
stability to
right.
be present.
You're completely right. This professional contract is actually something that derives from the Sports Act, from the Croatian Sports Act, and this is only allowed to a sports people. So it's not allowed for a regular employee, but just sports people.
And saying sports people, did the government delegate the verification of sports people being verified by the local sports association or not? For example, who is a sports person by law, local law? How is being defined?
Well, I'm not sure about about the clear definition, but it's like a person um, either amateurly or professionally um, doing sports.
Participating in organized sports, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's true.
That's that's what I was trying to understand. So the term, but per se, organized sports is already related to the full, federations, correct? So
Exactly.
you must have a federation. You must be affiliated to international federation and the pyramid
That's true.
structure and
That's
so
true.
on
That's
and
true.
so on.
You're
Yeah.
right.
So the government delegated this to federations, and I would like you to speak about the last thing that you just said about professional scholarship contract. We have already spoken about the the scholarship contracts related to
To the threshold of
threshold.
amateur
Yeah,
and yeah.
yeah,
But this professional scholarship contract is a fairly new thing in Croatia um, that was introduced after the new Sports Act came into force, according to which a difference between an amateur and a professional sports person is 10,000 euros per year.
which you
So
already said about the
yeah,
training compensation
yeah,
system.
exactly. So what this professional scholarship contract means is that a person concluding this contract is earning more than 835 per month, so more than 10,000 per year. And this is
So,
the only difference between the professional scholarship contract and the scholarship contract, the amount. Both
and
both of those agreements can be concluded until the player turns 24. So
mhm.
it's kind of like a contract that is only concluded with the young players. And the difference is the amount.
So we can emphasize or highlight or whatever that there is no any status of semi-professional,
No,
correct?
no, no, no. Either an amateur or professional, pursuant to the RSTP.
It's very good that law is pretty on side with sports in
It
this
is, yeah,
sense.
it is.
It's in line.
And the
And
last thing that I would like to mention about the employment contracts is and the peculiarity about the Croatian system is that there are no time limits for contracts except for the minors. So minors can only conclude an agreement for a period of 3 years, whereas no time limits are set in the Croatian RSTP for the rest of the players. So you can basically conclude an employment agreement with the player for 10 years, 15 years. That this is,
well,
let's say, this is a difference in relation to the RSTP.
yeah, Article 18 of RSTP, which regulates the employment relation,
Yeah,
special employment provisions with the player, actually says if the national about the 5-year rule I'm
yeah,
speaking, they
exactly.
say otherwise if national
Yeah,
law
yeah.
doesn't say otherwise, so you
And
have some leverage
Croatian
to.
Croatian national law does say otherwise. Yeah,
Yeah, by the way, in Armenia we have very interesting situation in this case because the local RSTP actually limits the term for 5 years, but the employment regulations of the country, which is the labor code, and we have a special law on like physical culture and sports. So these two laws do not speak about minimum or maximum term, but federation in this sense decided to limit this term for 5 years, and this regulation comes, I don't know, maybe like years ago. So
Mhm.
but this is, if you ask me, this is a good one, because I would say I already feel what will happen if we will let, let's say, indefinite regulation to step in. By saying indefinite, I mean 99 years. Okay,
Yeah,
so if we let this happen, I suppose we will have young players of 18 years old having signed employment agreements for 60, 70, 80 years, which is not good, and will create some significant imbalance within the system. So within this sense, I'm in line with our FA that, yeah, it should be 5 years, which is in line with our STP general rule. But
yeah.
yours, as you said, decided
No,
to take
no,
another approach.
no, but I do agree with you completely. And the practice in Croatia is 5 years tops. So I've never encountered a 10-year contract or an indefinite period of a contract in Croatia. So even though the regulations do allow contracts to be concluded for a longer period, it doesn't happen in practice.
Yeah, because that's what was my concern about. As a club lawyer, you will completely understand what I'm saying, right? When the player is
Right.
18, then the club calls the player and says, "You know what? You want to play at the main team, in the main team? Okay, here is a 10 years contract for you. Please sign. Otherwise, the training compensation system shall come in, and that's it." Which, for some extent, even for some extent, uh, it's not strictly evidential, but you may say that we have a feeling that at this particular moment, when the first professional contract is going to be signed by the main club and his own youth player, is somewhat of a example of unequal bargaining power. I mean, I'm not speaking strictly legally. There is a freedom, etc. I'm not speaking about legal point of view. I'm speaking about practical point of view, because the player has a burden on his shoulders related to training compensation payable for him by the new club. So there is a, let's say, small pressure on his freedom of movement to another club. But at the same way, the club has another leverage to offer even longer contract, right?
Yeah, that is true. However, first of all, in Croatia, most of these players, especially good ones, have agents. So agents get into play, and you discuss these agreements with their agents. That's the first thing, and then second one is, as we previously discussed and mentioned, Croatian clubs rely heavily on these young players because, um, as I've said, transfer money is coming in thanks to these young players, and then you don't want to have a like a row or a fight with this young player who could possibly in a 1 year or 2 years time bring in a huge amounts of money. So it's not that bad of a position for the players.
Yeah, and finally speaking, the nobody, let's say, canceled principle of reciprocity when signing a contract. So if you sign a 7 years term contract with the player, okay, then you are obliged to have him as an employee for 7 years. Or if you're
Exactly.
going to terminate, okay, then pay the compensation. So
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Okay, and the fourth question is absolutely up to you. What you would like to speak
Okay.
uh, about
I was
domestic.
thinking maybe two topics, if that's not a problem for you, if we have enough time, of course.
We
First
we
one,
have.
first one would be loans. which and there are something interesting in Croatia going on about the loans. And the second one, I would just like to shortly, briefly mention some of the provisions by the Croatian Football Federation in relation to the agents.
Okay.
And
FFAR.
yeah, in connection to the FFAR, yeah, but just briefly, very briefly.
Okay.
So first of all, with regards to the loans, similar to what we discussed about the training compensation system, loan system in Croatia is almost a copy of FIFA's provisions. So 6 players in, 6 players out, 3 players in and out from and to a same club. And limitations, these limitations do not apply to U21 players. However, the difference is that these players do not need to be club trained. So you can loan out as many of under 21 players as you wish. No need for them to be club trained, which is different to what FIFA's provisions mention. So this is the
Yeah.
first thing that's different, and then the second one is the this recently introduced regulations on cooperation between clubs. So it's a scheme pursuant to which higher tier clubs can enter into cooperation agreements with lower tier clubs, and according to those agreements, they can then make up to 10 players eligible to play for the lower tier club while remaining registered for the higher tier club. So this player that is on the list that has been concluded as a cooperation agreement between these two clubs is registered with the higher tier club, but is eligible to play for both the higher tier club and the lower tier club.
Simultaneously within the same season.
Yes.
Let us recap, okay? So first things first, the player is being registered with a loaner club. So, for example, if I loan the
With
player
the,
is
with the
with me.
club of origin, yeah.
Yes, but in the same way, it's a system where I let my player to play for another team
Without him being registered for that team.
without being registered for that team. So we have already three questions right away. First question: the calculation of training compensation for the loanee club.
The training compensation within this regulations on cooperation between clubs. So this is not a loan, just a joint registration, let's call it, or a joint eligibility to play. Training compensation stays with the higher tier club.
Okay. The second question is purely from the competition perspective. How the two clubs manage this kind of switch of the player from one team to another? Like, I mean, I'm speaking about the perspective of the head coaches, sports directors, or I do not want to dive into the risks of any kind of other things
Integrity
that
issues. Yeah.
I presume the principle of integrity. Okay, so I do not want to think in a negative way, the negative mindset, saying that this leads some several concerns about internet is to be, etc. But from the purely sports governance and management perspective, how the head coaches manage this?
Well, it's normally it's a thing. What happens is that these players start to play for a lower tier club, so they're completely training with them, playing with them. But if one of them impresses and caught an interest of a higher tier club's coach, then he can bring him back during the season and have him play for the higher team, for the higher tier club's team. So it's similar to a loan, but you can bring that player back to play for your first team earlier. You don't have to wait for the registration period, for example. But
And
before that, players are normally kept with either a higher tier club or a lower tier club, and then just uh, taken back or loaned out again. So it yeah.
and the third question, related to this matter is about, you said that the head coach just calls back, right, during the season or whenever he wants.
Yeah, it's about a
So
communication between two clubs.
I just want to understand from the regulatory perspective how it's going to be done in terms of disciplinary offenses. So let's say when the player committed fouls or whatever the disciplinary is instigated against, let's say the player commits a disciplinary misconduct related to funds. Okay, so basically we know that it's a general rule that in this case also the club is sanctioned. So in
Right.
these cases, is the sanction coming to the loaner club or the loanee club? How is this being done?
To the club in which the player with which the player was playing when this misconduct happened. So if it was something that happened during the match of the loanee club, then the loanee club would be the one responsible for this, or the club of origin, in a different scenario, of course.
I think that in this kind of contracts, you should be as simple as possible, because if you just make a small deviation from the general terms, you can fall under the TPI rule, actually.
And this is something also mentioned in the regulations, that the higher tier club cannot in any way influence on a sports performance of the loanee club. So it's forbidden within the regulations, and of course
Y-
within the Croatian RSTP as well, and the FIFA's RSTP.
yes, but
But yeah, of course, I agree with you. Yeah, I know what.
both of us understand that this
Yeah,
is the wording of it. Like if he is already in your team, like my play is registered with me and is at your team, there is already per se there is an influence, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
that's why I say it's very dangerous to try to have some kind of other conditions or whatever related to this kind of transfers. I mean, now I understand your concern why it seems like, you know, I think that these regulations will develop over time. They will not stay like this, because sooner or later I suppose there will be some kind of an abuse of this system sooner or later.
Surely, then you also have a problem with the number of registrations during the season of a player. So let's say the player starts with a top tier club, and pursuant to a cooperation agreement, he is also entitled to play, eligible to play for a lower tier club. But he played for a higher tier club within 6 months, and he played for a lower tier club. And then during a winter break, winter registration period, a club from abroad comes in and wants to transfer this player, wants to bring the player in, um, and that would be that would actually be his third club for which he
Yeah,
played throughout the season.
yeah.
Yeah,
3 clubs, 2 clubs rule, I
yeah,
know.
yeah,
And about FFAR, do you have something to say
yeah.
about?
Just very briefly, and this is an interesting thing that the Croatian Federation also decided to well, let's say not suspend some of the provisions that FIFA suspended within the FFAR. First of all, the Croatian NDRC kept the jurisdiction to hear agents-related cases, and the disciplinary committee can sanction infringements.
Which is good,
Yeah, which is very
because
good.
yes, because I seriously do not understand when you decide to continue the licensing of entities, not entities, like licensing persons, but at the same time you say, okay, you know, I give you a license, but I'm not entitled to sanction you. I do
Yeah,
not understand this,
yeah, I agree with you 100%. Yeah,
and
that's one.
that's the only regulations that local FA decided to leave, or there
That's
are
one.
others.
That's one thing, and the other one is the reporting obligations. So as you know, FIFA suspended this on an international level. However, on a local level, on a domestic level in Croatia, agents do have to report the agreements that they conclude either with players or
Yeah,
clubs.
you mean the portal reporting, the agent's portal reporting,
Yeah,
where the
yeah,
dog. Yeah,
but on a national level in Croatia, this is done via email. So
okay.
once they conclude a representation agreement and the transaction gets processed, they have to report this to the federation.
Yeah, okay. So, Hrvoje, thanks for the conversation. I think it was very precise and very on topic with all the matters we covered. I hope you liked it. I hope you
Yeah,
enjoyed it because
I
it's
loved it. I
interesting.
loved it, to be honest, and I would love to have another one like this. Just hearing you talking about the Armenian jurisdiction.
Well, I will do it, but I have some jurisdictions to cover yet. But I will obviously do it because we also have very interesting domestic regulations, and that's the thing, when you compare domestic regulations and you find out that this federation or this jurisdiction has come to this solution, so immediately as a practitioner, you ask yourself why they did it. So that's the thing that some markets decide to regulate this way, the other one that way,
Yeah,
and it's always, let's say, not only from the academic perspective, but for us as sports lawyers, it's interesting to compare this,
I
and
agree with you
and
completely.
why not, for example, I don't know, maybe somebody working in their own FA will listen to this,
Exactly.
yeah, they came to this solution and it will help them out, because self-regulation is always good thing. I like when problem solving is not copy pasted from elsewhere but is being solved on place.
But
But in
still,
any
you
case,
can
like,
learn a lot. Yeah,
yeah, it's just an idea to have in mind. Why not?
very good.
Okay,
Yeah,
so thank you for your time, and
thank you.
keeping in touch.
Of course.
Okay,
Enjoy
okay.
your day. Bye bye.
Bye bye.